Welcome to our midweek devotion. Well, the title of the current sermon series at Faith Methodist Church is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I think it's by divine appointment that today's reading, 1 Kings chapter 15, also tells us a story of a bad, a good, and an ugly king. Well, the first king is King Abhijam. Abhijam was the bad. Verse 3 tells us that he committed the same sins as his father before him, and he was not faithful to the Lord his God as his ancestor David had been. But very oddly, in the next verse, verse 4 tells us that despite of being bad, God blessed him and his rule was shining like a lamp. In other words, he had a good reign as a king. And not only that, in addition to having a good reign, God also blessed him with a very capable son to succeed him. But verse 4 also tells us that the reason God blessed him was not because of him, but because of the faith and works of his great-great-grandfather, King David. In other words, even though King Abhijam was bad, even though King Abhijam was evil in the sight of the Lord, for the sake of his good great-great-grandfather David, the Lord blessed him. But King Abhijam ruled only for 3 years, that's in verse 2. And then his son Asa succeeded the throne. King Abhijam was the bad. Who was the good? His son King Asa was the good. Verse 11 tells us King Asa did what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. He did many righteous and bold things and instituted many reforms in the country, including the bold decision to depose his grandmother, who was a worshipper of an obscene idol, as the queen mother. King Asa was the good. If King Abhijam was the bad and his son King Asa was the good, then who was the ugly? Well, everything seems to go well for Judah and the good king, King Asa, until he went to war with the northern kingdom, Israel. Verse 17 tells us Israel invaded Judah and fortified the border city of Ramah. It was a national crisis for Judah, for King Asa. But instead of conferring with God and relying on God like he did for his political reform, King Asa responded by removing all the silver and gold that was in the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the royal palace. He then sent these temple treasures to the king of Syria to buy favor and form a treaty with Syria. That is in verse 18. It was a brilliant, strategic, diplomatic, political move. But it was also a travesty. 1 Kings 15 doesn't give us much details of this episode, but the parallel account recorded in 2 Chronicles does. 2 Chronicles 16 verse 7 to 10 tell us that God was mad, but God was gracious and sent a prophet to warn the good King Asa. But unfortunately, the good King Asa was too full of himself. Not only did he reject the counsel, he imprisoned the prophets that God sent to him. The good has turned ugly. In today's reading, we observe 2 things. The first is the bad can have a good run. Indeed, the bad King Abhijam had a prosperous reign. The second is the good can turn ugly. The good King Asa may have started out well, but when a crisis emerged, he didn't hold up and ended up ugly. Very ugly. How ugly? Well, verse 23 tells us that in his old age, his feet became diseased. By the way, in Hebrew, the foot is a euphemism for genitals. So he really ended up very, very ugly. Poor thing, right? The bad can have a good run and the good can turn very ugly. So what is God trying to tell us? 2 things. Don't be deceived when things look good for you, because the bad can have a good run too. When things are running well with you, don't assume that you are in God's favor. Things may be going well for you not because of you. but maybe it's because of the faith of the one before you, maybe your parents or someone who is praying for you or trying to reach out to you or to disciple you. The bad King Abhijam was riding on the favor given to his great-great-grandfather, King David. So don't be deceived when things look good for you, because the bad can have a good run. The second thing is the good can turn ugly. So don't rest on your laurels. This is because it's not your work but your faith that counts. And especially in crisis, who do you turn to? The good King Asa must have thought he did well in his reform, and therefore God will bless him. So he became conceited and began to rely on his own wisdom and strength. But beware, even the good can turn ugly. The bad can look good and the good can turn ugly. My friends, remember, it is not your works that counts. It is your faith. Trust in God for wisdom and strength in good times and also in your crisis. Pray to God for his favor. Humble yourself. Don't be conceited. Don't give your pride a chance to make you ugly. Have a blessed day.